Chapter... Whoa. Nope. Chapter 9. It's about time, Sophie whispered, even though her hands were shaking. Whoa. Okay, sorry. She'd been waiting for the Black Swan to make contact ever since they'd revealed themselves with her rescue. Maybe they were finally going to explain why they'd made her and what they wanted her to do. It did feel strange knowing they were still watching her, though, still planting messages and clues in the shadows, waiting for her to find them. She glanced over her shoulder, half expecting to see a face peeking through the trees, but the woods were as silent and empty as ever. Sophie studied the inscription again, which must have been written in their special cipher runes, the only runes she could read, thanks to the way the Black Swan trained her brain. I thought you knew the Black Swan's code. She'd seen Grady look through scrolls with cipher runes tucked in the margins. Only a few scattered phrases. His voice had turned dark, angry almost. What does it say again? Let the past be your guide. She moved the compass in every direction, and the arrow always pointed north, just like it was supposed to, so the clue had to be the message itself. Couldn't they just say, "Meet us here and we'll explain everything"? Was that really so much to ask? Put the charm down, Sophie, Grady ordered, so loud it made her jump. What? Why? You're not taking another thing from them. If they want your help, they need to turn themselves in to the council, face up to their actions. What actions? Grady had been strange about the Black Swan, always getting angry or changing the subject whenever she brought them up, or asked about the council's search to find them. You're acting like they're the bad guys. Grady, Adeline said, stopping him before he could reply. Today is not the day for this. Grady sighed, and the pain in his eyes hurt Sophie's heart. Adeline was right. They were there to mourn their daughter, not talk about the hunt for the Black Swan. But... I'm keeping the charms, she mumbled, not looking at Grady. It's not safe. It's just a charm, Grady, Adeline interrupted. What are they going to do, track her with it? They already know where we live. Sophie risked a glance at Grady, who looked like he wanted to argue. Instead, he held out his hand. Let me see it again. Sophie hesitated, wondering if he would give it back. She couldn't imagine Grady being unfair like that, though, so she handed it over and Grady held it to the light, squinting at the bracelet from every possible angle. I suppose Adeline's right, he said through a sigh. The charm's not dangerous, but the message is. You can do what you want with the compass, but don't you dare let them lead you around with the clue. You're not their puppet. I know, but they also rescued me, she reminded him, for what felt like the 100th time. They're trying to help. So whatever this message means, I think we should figure it out. Grady pinched the bridge of his nose like the conversation was giving him a headache. Several seconds of silence passed before Adeline spoke for him. I think we should show it to Alden, see what he thinks we should do. Works for me, Sophie stood, dusting the grass off her wrinkled dress and pulling out her imparter. Should I hail him and let him know we're coming to Everglen? We can't go right now, Adeline said quietly. We still have to visit Brant. But maybe it's better if you don't. No, I'm coming with you. All the information overload had made her forget there was another part to Grady and Adeline's annual morning tradition, visiting Jolie's fiancé. Grady and Adeline shared a look before Adeline reached for Sophie's hand. Are you sure? Seeing Brant is the most upsetting part of this whole process. More upsetting than visiting their daughter's grave? Brant's not himself anymore, Grady said, like he knew what she was thinking. It's not easy to see him so broken. His face was as haunted as his tone, and Adeline just as pale. I go where you go, she told them, sounding like Sandor, minus the squeaky voice. She hadn't been much help to them at Jolie's grave, but she wasn't letting them do this alone. Not anymore. Not ever again. An elf lives here? Sophie couldn't help asking as the scenery came into focus. Everything she'd seen in the elven world was enormous and made of jewels or crystal or glass, with elaborate architecture and gold or silver accents. The square, windowless stone structure in front of them looked more like it belonged to a human, a poor, reclusive human with ugly taste in houses. Adeline fidgeted with the velvet satchel clutched in her white-knuckled hands. We had to move Brant somewhere he felt safe. The house didn't look safe. It looked cold and bleak. Even the land around it was nothing but jagged rocks and dark, dusty soil. Brant's afraid of fire now, as I'm sure you can understand, Grady said it quietly. He couldn't sleep until we found him somewhere that wouldn't burn. All his furnishings are fireproof. We even have his clothes specially made. What about his family? Don't they help you guys take care of him? Grady shifted uncomfortably, and Adeline's eyes dropped to the ground. It's dangerous for them. Not that Brant's dangerous. He barely moves, just stares at the wall, mumbling to himself. But the guilt. Adeline's voice cracked, and she cleared her throat before she whispered. The guilt could break them apart. Grady took Adeline's hand. There's a reason violence and cruelty are unheard of in our world, Sophie. Our minds aren't capable of processing the guilt that comes with such atrocities. Or there aren't supposed to be, at least. It's why no one suspected kidnapping when you and Dex vanished. Why no one wanted to believe that the Everblaze was burning. Because if one of us were to do something like that, the guilt would splinter our minds and let the darkness seep through the cracks. But why would Brant's parents feel guilty? Alden had told her the fire was an accident. They shouldn't, but guilt is an insidious thing, especially mixed with severe grief. It slips inside, casting doubt, making you wonder if there was anything you could have done, anything that would have changed. Grady stared into the distance, and Sophie wondered if Brant's parents weren't the only ones wrestling with guilt. It wasn't your fault, she said quietly. I know. The anger in his tone was unmistakable, and he didn't look at her as he walked away. But he'd only gone a few steps when he spun back to face her. Before we go inside, you have to promise that you will not, under any circumstances, try to read Brant's mind. I know the rules of telepathy. Telepaths had their own code of ethics to follow. Rule number 1 of which was never read a mind without permission. It's more than that. Brant's sanity cracked during the fire. Watching the house burn, knowing Jolie was inside, knowing he couldn't save her. It was too much. Grady's voice vanished for a second, and he had to swallow to bring it back. The trauma and guilt broke part of him. He's not completely catatonic, like someone whose sanity is shattered, but reading Brant's mind is extremely dangerous. Promise me you will not open your mind to his thoughts. I promise. He stared her down like he was searching for the truth in her words. Then he nodded, turned back toward the gray stone house, and climbed the steps to the thick metal door. Icy wind stung Sophie's cheeks as she and Adeline followed. When they joined his side, Grady pulled the chain that hung above them, and a low chime rumbled through the house, followed by an endless silence. They stood there so long, Sophie started to wonder if Brant was actually home. Then a deep voice called, "Come in."